seen progress that's been made. President Trump and I agreed to pursue negotiations towards a deal within the coming 30 days. The Government of Canada will also review its remission framework for automobiles to favour the use of Canadian steel and aluminum in Canadian-made products. The government is responding to the impact of the unjust U.S. tariffs with multiple tools. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. This week, Canada hosted the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta, and as chair, I focused on strengthening international partnerships with leading nations around the table to find areas of cooperation on shared priorities. Canadian leadership will be defined not just by the strength of our values, but also by the value of our strength. The world wants to do much more, and work much more closely with Canada, and we're ready. Now, on Monday morning, I, with colleagues, met with President Trump to discuss international priorities as part of the G7, but also to further negotiate a new economic and security partnership between Canada and the United States. And as we've said repeatedly, we'll take all the time we need to get the best deal for Canada, but no longer. And seeing progress that's been made, President Trump and I agreed to pursue negotiations towards a deal within the coming 30 days. We'll continue these negotiations, of course, in good faith. In parallel, we must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present. And that's why we're announcing that Canada will be introducing a series of countermeasures to protect Canadian steel and aluminum workers and producers. And there's several, and I'm going to list them. First, Canada will adjust its existing counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum products on the 21st of July, at the end of that 30-day period, in other words. We're going to adjust them to levels consistent with the progress that's made at that point on the broader trading arrangements with the United States. Secondly, we will implement reciprocal procurement rules, ensuring that only Canadian producers and producers from trading partners that provide Canada with tariff-free reciprocal access through trade agreements can compete for federal government procurement of steel and aluminum. The Government of Canada will also review its remission framework for automobiles to favour the use of Canadian steel and aluminum in Canadian-made products. And finally, we're creating two government stakeholder task forces, one for steel, one for aluminum, to monitor trade and market trends and to better support government decision-making and workers going forward. Remind that the $10 billion large enterprise tariff loan facility remains open to help affected businesses access the liquidity they need and to return to financial resilience as the market stabilizes. In short, the government is responding to the impact of the unjust U.S. tariffs with multiple tools. We will review our response as the negotiations progress. I'll be meeting with the premiers of the provinces and territories tomorrow to discuss this response and our broader coordination going forward. The next week, I will attend the Canada-EU Summit, as well as the NATO Summit, as part of Canada's new government's mission to strengthen and build security and economic partnerships with reliable partners. And this week, in this House, Parliament has the opportunity to pass the core of our domestic economic response, the One Canadian Economy Act, because together, we as Canadians can give ourselves far more than the Americans can ever take away. Steel and aluminum workers are on the front lines of this trade crisis. These are the workers who will help us build one strong Canadian economy, the strongest economy in the G7.
Are you opposing anti-dumping tariffs because the U.S. asked you to as part of these negotiations over the 30 days?
The short answer, no, there was not a request from the United States, but it's a consequence of the U.S. actions. As you know, the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum are global tariffs. They're not targeted specifically at Canada, but they, of course, affect our steel industries and our workers. And one of the consequences of that effect or prospective consequences, is that steel from other countries, from third countries, start to come into Canada if we don't protect our industry. So we're setting these quotas. It's a long word, tariff rate quotas, but a quota for the amount of steel that can come in from third countries to limit that amount, to stabilize the market. And to be clear, we will be reviewing the level of those tariff rate quotas as this progresses. It depends on what the United States does, first and foremost with Canada, whether we come to an agreement in the next 30 days, but also what they do with the rest of the world.
Rolling out any additional support for the industry beyond the emergency loans that you mentioned, for example, would the government ever consider investing directly in a steel producer?
Well, it's an important question, and I'll say the following. First is that we're united in working on all forms of support for the industry short-term, tariff measures we're announcing today, liquidity as necessary, but also a necessary restructuring of demand and the industry that will happen almost irrespective of what happens between Canada and the United States because of the global impact of the new U.S. trade policy. So that starts with buying Canadian steel and aluminum for federal projects, working with the provinces to do the same, making sure that the enormous infrastructure bill that's about to happen in this country, if we get the One Canadian Economy bill through Parliament, the impact of these nation-building projects, making sure that those are taking advantage of our industries. Same with autos. Same with the new defense spending that will be considerable over the years. And what we're working together is on those policies to encourage the consumption of Canadian steel and aluminum, but also we will be looking at how to finance the bridge of two industries that have been very oriented north-south, not exclusively, but very oriented north-south, to be oriented towards Canada first, and then globally with reliable partners. Thank you.
Next question.
That's great with global news. Are you willing to sign the security and economic agreement that you've been negotiating with Mr. Trump if any of the Trump's tariffs are still in place after that deal is signed?
We're willing to sign a security and economic or commercial agreement with the United States that's in Canada's best interest, and only that. So that's the negotiation. That there is still some room to travel, so to speak, before we get to that point. But we have a deadline in order to achieve that, and if it's in Canada's interest, we'll sign it. If it's not, we won't.
So you're willing to sign a deal with the Americans and still have some of the tariffs that Donald Trump has signed still in place?
So the opponent says it's a negotiation right now. I was anticipating the en français. Sorry, but yeah, it's a negotiation. We start from a position which is clear in terms of the tremendous contribution of Canadian workers, Canadian companies, first and foremost to jobs and livelihoods here in Canada, but to the competitiveness of the American, for example, specifically in the auto sector where steel is and aluminum are so tightly tied, and our auto companies are so tightly tied. We are part of the core that makes American automakers competitive. It is in the U.S. interest as well. They have to fully see that.